Welcome to the 2021 Local Program Symposium. My name is Merrill Meckler-Hickson. I'm the Section Chief for WisDOT Local Programs and Finance, and I would like to start by thanking everyone in attendance for your interest in local programs. Today's symposium has reserved 3 hours of time for both presentations and a short Q&A session at the end. If you have any questions as you view any of the presentations today, you may submit those questions to the email address that's displayed on the screen on the bottom, dotlocalprograms@dot.wi.gov. WisDOT staff will be monitoring the inbox for your questions, and we will address them during the Q&A portion at the end. We have a great selection of speakers today that include representatives from the WisDOT Regions, WisDOT Central Office, the Federal Highway Administration, and the University of Wisconsin. However, before we get into the presentations, I would like to introduce two special guest speakers who would like to provide some opening comments. Next slide, please. We are pleased to have WisDOT Secretary Craig Thompson join us today. In January 2019, Governor Tony Evers appointed Craig Thompson to serve as Secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. Previously, he was the Executive Director of the Transportation Development Association of Wisconsin, and he has more than 25 years of experience working with Wisconsin businesses, communities, legislators, and units of government. Secretary Thompson is a native of Racine and a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks, Merrill. I really appreciate the opportunity to kick off and talk to all of you this morning on the Local Government Symposium. I think it's a very exciting time as we look at the next biennial period for the Local Road Improvement Program. And as we look back really on what's transpired in the last year to 14, 15 months plus since we've been in this pandemic, I just want to personally thank all of the people involved in this meeting, because I think it has required just the next level of communication between all of us to keep things going. And I think that's exactly what's happened. So on behalf of looking at all of the DOT staff that are on here and the extra mile they've gone, and all of you at the local level that have continued to communicate with us, I think we've managed through this together about as well as we could have. Heading into when the governor got elected, he made fixing our roads one of the three points that he ran on. And so when he won, and after I was named, we really set to looking at seeing how we could reverse what had been a fairly long trend of road conditions at the local level and at the state level declining. And so the first budget that was passed was the first budget in a generation that brought in significant new revenue to transportation moving forward. And we really dedicated all of those funds to fixing what we have. All of that money, the increase, the $465 million increase, went into either our state highway rehabilitation program, which was to try to fix our 2-lane state highways across the state, or to the locals in the form either of general transportation aids, local road improvement program, or what we had briefly called the multimodal local supplement program, which I'll talk about again in a second. But beyond all that, those dollars going out, then we had to work together to make sure that we start stemming the tide of the decline that we were at. And you've all done an amazing job in that. We have tried to partner with you to find more efficient ways. Our low risk pilot program, I think, has been just a tremendous success story on that. And it's something that we continue to want to build on. We've been reaching out with the locals and the MPOs and others to see if there's even more ways that we can make the local road improvement program more streamlined and more accessible so that we can stretch the dollars that are in there on your side as well to repair as many roads and bridges and fix as much of our infrastructure at the local level as we can. We're fully aware of the 115,000 miles of roads in this state, that 90% of that is at the local level. So you play such an important part of this, and our partnership with locals is such an important part. I really want to thank Merrill and the job they've done in the local program, working with all of you. We look forward to trying to continue to advance some of these programs and get things in your hands to be able to fix our assets at the local level. While we made progress in that previous budget, I'm under no illusion that we have got a long way to go with a lot of local roads throughout this state at all levels of local government, and for all of the types of industries that this first and last miles connections facilitate. So we've got a lot of work left to do. In this budget, the governor has proposed more increases in general transportation aids, but has also proposed a $75 million program of sort of returning the multimodal local supplement program that we had initially set up, but had to transition into LRIP because of the Supreme Court overturning a veto that created that program. One of the things we heard when we set up that program was just how accessible it was to especially look at smaller units of government that don't have as many resources. And so we're really trying to build upon what we had proposed with that. That's before the legislature right now. And we're hopeful that we can retain some of those sorts of flexibilities that we're able to build into the multimodal local supplement program. But either way, Rebecca and her team and everybody have been working on LRIP as well, and how we can continue to make that as user-friendly as we can for locals too. So the final thing I'll mention is the governor also put in allowing counties with going to referendum to levy up to a 1/2 cent additional sales tax, which if it were put to use for infrastructure could keep all those dollars local and could really provide significant revenue for locals as well. But that is making its way through the legislative process, and we'll see how that ultimately turns out. But first and foremost, as I started out, I just really wanted to thank all of you. All the things you kept going at the local level during this period of time. We were able to keep all 375 projects during the last construction season moving forward, not only on time, but some of them we were able to advance because of reductions in traffic. And so we're really excited about moving forward to the next stage with all of you together. So thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to address you this morning, and please have a very productive meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We also are pleased today to have FHWA Wisconsin Deputy Division Administrator Linda Swan able to join us. In January 2020, Ms. Swan became the Deputy Division Administrator for the FHWA Wisconsin Division. Prior to that, she had served as a team leader and financial manager in the FHWA Oregon Division from 2015 to 2020. She also has prior management and finance experience in the private sector, nonprofit, and higher education. Welcome, Deputy Division Administrator Swan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting Federal Highway to kick off this Wisconsin Department of Transportation 2021 Statewide Local Program Symposium. I have a very special place in my heart for local projects and local staff. I originally joined Federal Highway to work on the ARA program. So I spent a good amount of my time on over 200 projects out working with towns, cities, and counties on project delivery and federal requirements, and trying to explain the whys and the hows behind some of the things that we ask. I'd like to thank everyone for involved in putting together this symposium. I know that events like this don't just happen. It takes a lot of coordination and work. And for this year's symposium, which I understand is your first statewide, adapting to this virtual environment provides definitely some unique challenges. Our last year has been a lot of unique challenges. So again, everyone involved, thank you. Our Federal Highway team is located here in Madison, Wisconsin, and we're here to assist WisDOT in any way that we can on working with locals and administrating federal assisted projects. Our new division local program coordinator is Tracy Duvall, and you'll be hearing from her a little later. During the symposium, just a little bit about our office. We've had, due to retirements and promotions, we've had almost a 50% changeover of our team. And so we're definitely busy training our new employees, and all of these employees have joined us in a virtual environment. I actually haven't met half of the office in person. Just wanted to let you know that our webpage for Federal Highway is up to date, and we're listing our program managers and their program areas. WisDOT has put together a great agenda to share you some meaningful information for you on this new program cycle. And one area that is a focus of our division is increasing local participation in safety and the use of HISIP funds. Please take note and please be engaged in the process and bring forward quality projects that meet the eligibility of this program. I think there's been a lot of talk about money. We have literally 3 pots of money that are an active part of the conversation. Right after the first of the year, we had an additional $10 million in supplemental COVID funding. We refer this as to the backfill money to try to make the state or whole with the lack of or the lower state taxes or gas taxes. We also have the infrastructure package, which is currently in the news. It's actually dominating the news cycle. And then one of the things that you're not hearing a whole lot about, but we're in a FAST Act extension. And this is our authorization to actually exist and run the program. And that runs through September 30th. We're hoping that they're working on that extension or reauthorization, hopefully it's a multi-year, as they're talking about the infrastructure package. So we look forward to being as supportive as possible for our local partners and working with our state to come up with maybe some innovative ways of getting money out on the local level and to build some great transportation projects. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Deputy Division Administrator Swan and Secretary Thompson, for your participation today. So let's get right into the presentations. Next slide, please. I'll kick things off with a short overview of WisDOT local programs. Next slide, please. For those of you who are unfamiliar with WisDOT local programs, we are the central office staff who administer and schedule the programs that assist local governments with needed improvements to local roads, highways, bridges, as well as bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Local programs is housed in the WisDOT Bureau of Transit, Local Roads, Railroads, and Harbors. And I'm pleased today actually to be able to announce 2 critical staffing changes that have occurred recently. Jen Murray has moved from the WisDOT Planning section into the Open Butler Bureau Director position. And Tim Alushigan has transitioned from his longtime role as General Transportation Aids Program Manager into the Open Local Program Supervisor position. We are very excited to have these individuals assume their new roles, and they, along with myself, are available to assist you with any local programs questions you may have. All of our contact information is displayed here on the screen. Just a second, I know we're hearing some background noise. If all of the presenters on the phone could mute their themselves, that'd be fantastic. I know that the contact information here on the screen, it may be a little hard to read. Don't worry about rushing to write anything down. We will be making a PDF copy of today's presentations available on the WisDOT website, and an email will be going out with a link to the direct path to that once it has been posted. In addition, this slide has the contact information for the statewide program managers in local programs. All of these folks have been established in their roles for well over a year now at a minimum. We have Patrick Vandersanden, who is the statewide program manager for the Local Roads Improvement Program. Travis Hooley is the statewide program manager for the Transportation Alternatives Program and the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. And Mike Lawhern is the statewide program manager for the Surface Transportation Program and for Local Bridge. Please feel free to reach out to any of the individuals on this list if you have any specific questions regarding any of the local programs that they manage, or again, please feel free to reach out to either Jen, Tim, or me directly. Next slide, please. It is important to recognize that WisDOT local programs is a significant resource for local municipalities in the state of Wisconsin. Over the biennium, local programs manages over $1.5 billion through our state transportation aids and our federal aids programs. In state fiscal year 21 alone, we provided administration and disbursement of $525.2 million in state transportation aids through general transportation aids, or GTA, along with the one-time supplemental transportation aids, which was made available this biennium. GTA is actually the second largest program in WisDOT's budget, and it's an invaluable resource for local governments who are trying to find ways to finance their transportation needs. Our section also manages a variety of special transportation aids, and these include connecting highways aids, county forest road aids, expressway policing aids, lift bridge aids, as well as disaster damage aids. Now, that number that you see over in the lower right-hand corner, 1,922, that is actually the total number of Wisconsin local units of government that benefit annually from WisDOT state transportation aids, which are managed here in the local programs and finance section. Next slide, please. In addition to these state transportation aids, in state fiscal year 21, WisDOT local programs administered and allocated $165.9 million in federal and state funds to local and units of government through our road, bridge, multimodal, and transportation aids programs. These programs include the Local Roads Improvement Program, or LRIP, for $33 million annually. That's in state dollars. The Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, commonly referred to as CMAQ, for $10.7 million federal dollars annually. The Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP, for $7 million federal dollars annually. The Local Bridge Improvement Assistance Program, commonly just referred to as Local Bridge, for roughly $43 million annually, and that program is funded with a combination of both state and federal funding. Lastly, we have the Federal Surface Transportation Program, or STP, at $72 million annually. That includes a $5 million set aside for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HISIP, and Mike Finkenbinder will be going into more detail on that program a little bit later on in the symposium. All of these dollar amounts, again, are fiscal year 2021 numbers. Next slide, please. This slide really just provides a visual of the funding levels for all of the state transportation aids and federal aids programs that were discussed in the previous two slides. Please note, in fiscal year 20, there's that line item for $90 million in one-time funding for the Local Roads Improvement Program supplement. That is what Secretary Thompson referred to as the multimodal local supplement program. Next slide. So just to give a simplified summary, WisDOT Local Programs and Finance, we provide the resources, encourage sound investments, and just generally promote the importance of local transportation systems to Wisconsin's transportation network, always in accordance with state statute. We administer and schedule the federally and state-funded transportation aids programs statewide. We make every effort to accommodate local transportation needs and priorities. We respond to legislative initiatives and mandates that result from the biennial budget process. A great example of that is that LRIP supplement mentioned previously. We develop the fiscal mechanisms and the processes to distribute funding, be that through an application process like in TAP, or through the rating and ranking of projects like in our Local Bridge Program, or STP. And we do all of this really to ensure the maximum allocation of funds and efficacy on the local transportation system. Lastly, our section develops program policy and processes the applications and helping develop the state municipal agreements for all of the various transportation aids programs that are administered in the section. Next slide, please. Now, for the benefit of those of you in the audience who may not necessarily be intimately familiar with all of the 3- and 4-letter acronyms that I've been throwing around over the last couple of slides, we thought it would be helpful to just briefly go over each of the long-standing WisDOT federally and state-funded transportation aids programs. Some of the folks on the call today may only have worked within a couple of these programs. Some of you perhaps are not familiar with any of them and have just attended today to get some information. Really, we just wanted to provide a little bit of a base for further conversation today. Next slide. So first, the Local Roads Improvement Program, or LRIP. Established in 1991, LRIP assists local governments in improving seriously deteriorating county highways, town roads, and city and village streets. That seriously deteriorating component is a statutory requirement. LRIP is a state reimbursement program that has two components, entitlement portion and a competitive discretionary component that has an application process. Each of the components pays up to 50% of total eligible project costs, with local governments providing the balance. Next slide. The LRIP program is WisDOT managed in the local program section, but projects themselves are administered by local units of government. County highway commissioners serve as regional program coordinators and administrative points of contact between WisDOT Central Office and local LRIP recipients in each county. And as previously mentioned, LRIP is a biennial program that pays up to 50% of total eligible project costs, with the balance then provided by local units of government. Next slide. Next, we have the Surface Transportation Program, commonly referred to as STP. STP provides federal funding, which means that STP projects are subject to federal guidelines. STP provides federal funding for up to 80% of the cost of local road or bridge improvements. Structures can be included, with a 20% local match. The program is split into an urban and a rural component. STP eligible roads must be a functional classification of urban collector or higher in an urban area to qualify for STP, or a major collector or higher in rural areas. And this is due to federal funding requirements for the program. Connecting highways in Wisconsin are not eligible. They are funded through Connecting Highways aids. The STP urban program does have funding sub-allocations, which are based on population groups. This means in larger urbanized areas in the state, metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs, determine the projects that will be funded through the STP program. And because WisDOT is the delegated authority for these federal funds, STP projects are all statelets with state oversight. Next slide, please. Next, we have the Local Bridge Improvement Assistance Program. Local Bridge is both state and federally funded, with an annual budget of roughly $43 million. State statute determines which bridges are eligible for the Local Bridge Program, meaning that bridge replacement and rehabilitation projects are dependent on bridge sufficiency ratings for program eligibility. Bridges with a sufficiency rating of less than 50 are eligible for replacement. Bridges with a sufficiency rating of 80 or lower are eligible for rehabilitation. Eligible bridges must also be on a local street or highway with a clear span of 20 feet or more, and bridges constructed or reconstructed in the last 10 years are not eligible for funding through the Local Bridge Program. There is usually a very big demand for this program, which means that for most program cycles, we do not have enough available funding for all submitted applications. Due to statutory requirements similar to STP, all local bridge projects are statelets. Next slide, please. And this brings us to the two long-standing federally funded multimodal funding programs that are managed in the section. The Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP, allocates federal funds to transportation improvement programs that expand travel choice, strengthen the local economy, improve the quality of life, and protect the environment. The Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement, or CMAQ program, funds transportation projects that contribute to attainment or maintenance of the national ambient air quality standards for ozone, carbon monoxide, and particulate matter. Next slide. TAP is an entirely federally funded competitive grant program that provides up to 80% federal project funding with a 20% local match. It has an annual funding level of around $7 million, with a funding sub-allocation for the larger urbanized areas similar to STP. So MPOs in areas with populations over 200,000 select their TAP projects through a separate competitive funding process. There is a competitive statewide TAP project selection process for the remainder of the biennial funding. One unique and extremely important feature of TAP, in 2012, the state legislature passed a commencement rule for the TAP program as a part of the program statute. This states that a TAP project must go to construction within 4 years of the project award. That's the date on the award letter. This commencement rule really has helped foster the competitive nature of the TAP program, as local units of government must ensure that they can meet commencement requirements as a part of the application process. Because TAP is a competitive grant program, WisDOT caps TAP funding levels at the time of project award. This means that it is absolutely critical for TAP projects to be delivered on time, on budget, and within scope. TAP projects can be either state or local lets per agreement with FHWA. Next slide, please. Like TAP, CMAQ is entirely federally funded, again at an 80-20 cost share, with an annual funding level of roughly $10 million. Only projects in Wisconsin's air quality and attainment areas, which is comprised of 10 counties, basically the eastern part of the state that borders Lake Michigan. Only projects in these areas are eligible for CMAQ funds. Because this is an air quality program, there is a technical assessment component, and potential projects need to pass this assessment as well as meet the maintenance area requirement. CMAQ cycles are 4 years, generally starting in the odd numbered calendar years. Next slide. And that's really a good segue into the topic of program cycles. Really, for all of our local programs, the way that we handle project design and construction programming is through the use of program cycles. Generally, our program cycle structure is 4 to 5 years, with new program cycles starting every 2 years. This gives local units of government 1 to 2 years for design prior to starting construction. In essence, the 4 to 5 years of program cycle funding allows local units of government to secure project construction funding while still providing ample time for project design. Each program cycle is meant to add an additional 2 fiscal years of funding for new projects. However, and this is an important point to keep in mind, projects that are delayed and that end up getting rescheduled into future fiscal years are automatically going to reduce the funding that we're going to have available to be able to fund new projects. Again, this means that consistent and on-time delivery of projects really is essential for WisDOT to effectively administer local programs and ensure that the maximum program funding is utilized for local projects. Next slide, please. The next set of local program cycles are being rolled out this year. The new program documents for STP, Local Bridge, and CMAQ were just released this past Friday, May 14th. There are also some tentative dates listed on this slide for LRIP and for TAP, but please keep in mind these dates will not be final until they're given in the new program cycle materials, which will be released over the next few months. For LRIP, the deadline for the next application period right now is tentatively scheduled for January 15th, 2022. This is pretty standard compared to past deadlines. The application period for the 2022 to 2026 CMAQ program cycle has an established application deadline now of August 2nd. And the 2022 to 2027 STP and Local Bridge program cycle now has an established deadline of October 15th. The TAP application deadline right now is tentatively scheduled for January 24th, 2022, but please refer to the official program cycle announcements over the next few months for confirmation on the final deadlines for LRIP and for TAP. Next slide, please. This slide shows the timelines for tentative program award announcements in the next cycle. Again, these are all preliminary, but project awards for LRIP discretionary, STP, Local Bridge, and CMAQ right now are all anticipated to be announced in March 2022, with the TAP project awards announced a little bit later on in July of 2022. These anticipated dates are, again, all pretty consistent with the timing that we've had in past program cycles. We don't anticipate any changes to these dates right now, but we are very early in budget negotiations for the next biennium. So please refer to the timelines provided in the final program cycle announcements. All of these will be communicated through press releases as well as on the WisDOT website when finalized. I know Michael Erickson will be giving a great overview of the WisDOT website in his presentation, which is coming up right after this one. Next slide, please. So following that brief overview of local programs, I want to take a little bit of time to discuss one of the policies that we use in local programs to administer scheduled projects. This is guidance that may be more helpful for some folks on the call who have some familiarity with local programs. After this, I'll offer some tips for sponsors who are interested in applying for the first time for a local programs project. So to start with, the mechanism we use when project changes occur. Change management is not a new process, but it is a process that really has a new focus given some of the challenges and constraints that have been created by the COVID pandemic. Change management is a WisDOT mechanism that the department uses to manage WisDOT program budgets and schedules. Rather than capping each and every project at award, WisDOT introduced change management as a process for projects to apply for valid funding increases and schedule change requests. You know, look, we recognize things can happen during design and construction. Projects get delayed for various reasons, as has happened during the pandemic. And this can make projects more complex and more expensive. This creates a need for a mechanism that manages project changes programmatically. that allows us to manage local programs a little bit more effectively. Change management requests are submitted by WisDOT regional staff to WisDOT central office. These requests can cover funding increase requests, sunset extension requests, project schedule changes, as well as project drops and substitutions. Project funding increases are contingent on the ability to deliver the project within scope, and certain programs like TAB do not allow for project cost increases. If you do have to go outside of initial scope, essentially we just need to see a valid engineering need. If the project needs to be rescheduled, the project can be rescheduled. However, we do have to move it into a fiscal year where there is available funding. This really ties back into the program cycle scheduling restrictions that I mentioned previously. Michael Erickson will also be discussing change management, I believe, in his presentation that's coming up after this one. Next slide, please. Now, I realize that the last slide may have been putting the cart in front of the horse for some of the folks on the call. So I'll take a step back. For those of you who may be new to the local programs application process, and maybe as a reminder for some more experienced sponsors, I just wanted to go over some generalized basic tips to create a successful local programs application. These points will be reinforced and gone into greater detail on by some of the subsequent presenters this morning. I'm going to walk through writing an application from start to finish. I'll discuss actions that you can take before filling out the application, what to do as you're writing the application, and then some best practices for after you've submitted your application. All right, so let's start with some actions to take prior to the application process. Before you start, you'll need to do some legwork and some preparation related to your project. The first thing to do when a grant application period announcement comes out, and this may seem obvious, but you'll want to take a thorough look at the supporting documentation. For WisDOT, this is usually the program guidelines document. Study this document to make sure that you're eligible to apply and eligible to be competitive. Gauging eligibility is generally pretty cut and dry for WisDOT programs. There's usually a defined list of eligibility criteria. Gauging competitiveness can be a bit tougher, but generally in our WisDOT programs, looking at the selection or evaluation criteria within the published guidelines document can really kind of tell you everything you need to know about competitiveness. After you've looked at supporting documentation for eligibility and competitiveness, then you can start tailoring your project and your application to the specific program you're interested in. You'll want to develop a clear definition of both the project scope and project need. You can also begin to conduct stakeholder outreach. If you speak with someone who supports the project and that person has some standing within your community, request a letter of support if that's allowed in the program you're applying for. Sometimes you can include these letters with the grant application itself, or you can pull excerpts in your application narrative to make your application more compelling. Also remember, you can always provide your writer with an example of a past letter so that they have a better idea of what to write. Next slide, please. So now I'll move on to some actions that should be taken during the application process. You'll want to complete all sections of the application materials. An incomplete application may not be considered. For LRIP, for example, we give applicants the chance to add required materials if they've forgotten to include them, but some programs do not afford applications that same sort of leniency. In applications that I've reviewed, the materials most commonly omitted include maps of project areas, breakdowns of eligible costs, and photos of the project area. Please remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Don't miss the chance to include a photo if you're allowed to. For our WisDOT programs, a location map is generally required with each application. One really great way to clearly highlight project area on a map is to use a WisDOT tool called Whistler, or the Wisconsin Information System for Local Roads, which has interactive mapping functionality. I know that Whistler is going to be covered in at least one of the presentations that's coming up. This is a really helpful tool for demonstrating the precise termini of the project in one map, which is what our WisDOT programs require. Whistler also allows local governments to access information related to local roads, such as width, surface type, pavement condition rating, etc. For more information about putting together a cost estimate for local programs application, Ben Jordan from the Wisconsin Transportation Information Center, and who will be speaking later, is definitely a great resource. Another must while writing your application is to review your application materials for errors. Look for common errors like word swaps or misplaced punctuation. It can be helpful to read the grant aloud to yourself or have an outside reviewer who's completely unfamiliar with your project. Just take a quick look at it. This is independent verification that your application is clear to those without a lot of inside knowledge of the project. And really, I think that feeds into a larger point about the need to write concisely and clearly. Some of the best applications employ the less is more strategy and keep their applications really concise, specific, and clear. Many of our WisDOT programs do allow for an application narrative section. This is your opportunity to speak directly to the discretionary selection committee if there is one for the program. So please make sure that you write to the evaluation criteria. For example, if safety is one of the evaluation criteria, which is the case for the LRIP and TAP programs, for example, you'll definitely want to speak to how your project promotes safety in your application narrative. Writing style absolutely matters here. I hear from selection committees that the best applications really sell the project by speaking directly to the evaluation criteria and then engaging the reviewer with compelling information. Successful applications make it easy for the committee to think, hey, this is a great project. It's worthy of funding in the program. After your application is complete, it's also really helpful to read through it just one more time with the evaluation criteria in mind. This is how the committee of reviewers will score your application. And reading like a committee member can give you a lot of insight as to whether you're hitting the marks that you intended to while you were writing it. Finally, know your application deadline for the program. Make sure you submit your materials by that deadline. Be sure you note the time of day that the application is due, and if possible, submit it well in advance of the deadline in case you run into any technology issues. Also check any attachments before you send off the final version of your application. Next slide, please. After submitting your application, a good applicant really has three traits. They're proactive, they're patient, and they're persistent. We recommend that you confirm receipt of application materials in case there was an error in transmission. Also, if something changes with your project, for example, if an event occurs that requires some sort of a scope change, make sure you update your application or the department as soon as possible. For programs that do not have a publicized award announcement date, it can be helpful to ask when project awards are likely to be announced. For the local programs, these are the tentative award dates I referenced a couple of slides earlier. Additionally, in the waiting period between application and award announcement, do not start construction or design work on your project if the work is included in your pending application. Projects with WisDOT funding are not authorized to incur costs until the contract between the state and the municipality, also known as the state municipal agreement, is signed by both parties. Finally, be persistent. Not all applicants are successful the first time. These are often very competitive programs. Programs like TAP and CMAQ and LRIP discretionary always have more applications than available funding. If your project is not awarded funding the first time you apply, use it as a learning experience, and then you can improve your application for a future submission. Next slide, please. In addition to the WisDOT Central Office local program staff, we also have dedicated regional local program managers who are stationed in your specific areas that can assist you with the application process for our programs. These are individuals many of you have likely interacted with in the past. I won't go through the entire list. The list, it will be included in the presentation materials, and I believe it's also referenced in another presentation coming up. If you have any delivery or application questions regarding any of our local programs, these individuals are a great resource to reach out to first, and at the very least, they can generally steer you to the right person to address your specific question. Next slide, please. These next two slides just give some additional resources you can refer to for local programs guidance. Again, we'll be posting a PDF of today's presentations, so don't scramble to write these down. Next slide, please. They contain links to FHWA, DNR, and WisDOT guidance for road, bridge, bicycle, and pedestrian projects. These links may be useful as you apply for and construct projects through WisDOT local programs. Next slide, please. And once again, here's the contact information for both myself and Local Programs and Finance Section Supervisor Tim Alushigan. Please feel free to reach out to either of us at any time with your local programs questions. Next slide. So thank you for your time and your attention this morning. And with that, I would like to pass the mic over to Southwest Region Local Program Manager Michael Erickson for an overview of local programs oversight roles and responsibilities. Take it away, Michael.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Merrill. This section is going to cover project oversight and project development. My name's Michael Erickson. I'm the local program manager for the Southwest region. My office is located in Madison. Matthew Van Netta, the local program project manager from the Northwest region, will be talking about project development. Next slide, please. As Merrill alluded to, we have a WisDOT website, and you can reach that website by wisconsindot.gov. And if you go to the Doing Business tab, scroll down to Local Governments and click on Assistance Programs, you will find the applications and guidelines for all of the programs mentioned today. You'll also find helpful tools and videos which assist you in the application process and after your project's approved. Important information on real estate acquisition, consultant selection, and the environmental documentation process is available on our website. Most projects are state lots, STP urban, local bridge, and STP rural. But for TAP and CMAQ, those are predominantly locally let contracts. And important information and guidance for that is found in our Sponsor's Guide to Non-Traditional Transportation Project Implementation. And that's a mouthful. We normally call it the Sponsor's Guide. And you can find that information as well on our WisDOT website if you go there. If you have any questions navigating this, please contact your local program managers or central office. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to just discuss an overview of changes that have occurred since our last cycle. First off, oversight by the management consultants ended in 2018. Management consultants are now gone from the local programs, and WisDOT Regions now manage the local programs, including TAP and CMAQ statewide. WisDOT is committed to lowering the cost of delivery of the local programs. WisDOT oversight costs have been lowered, and WisDOT continues to work towards lowering these costs as we move forward in delivering these projects and programs. Replacement in kind no longer exists in the local bridge program. Bridge policy is based on performance-based practical design with engineering and safety concerns a priority. WisDOT works directly with the local sponsor to build the best structure to meet current standards and future needs and requirements if justified through the design process. The local public agency, or LPA, these can be used in between each other. It's the same entity. The local sponsors, the one paying the bill, they're the one signing the agreement, and they own these projects and are responsible for a higher level of involvement in the delivery than the past. In the past, we had management consultants that helped in this process. They're no longer with us. So the local sponsors are now required to be more involved with their projects. They're responsible from the project through the delivery process all the way up to letting. The LPA owns the project. These are your projects, not WisDOT, and WisDOT is responsible for the oversight because of the stewardship and oversight agreement that we have between FHWA and WisDOT for the use of federal funds. WisDOT coordinates with the local sponsor on developing the delivery schedule of your approved project and expects the projects to be delivered on the schedule after it's approved and the state municipal agreement is approved as well. Emphasis here is let's maintain these schedules to the best of our ability once they're approved. And as mentioned before, all cost increases after project's approval must go through change management. All projects approved in our programs are limited at approval, but WisDOT does have a process for increasing funds if it's based on engineering determinations and if funds are available when that request is made. Also, I'd like to emphasize that is the LPA or local sponsor that initiates these change management requests that then get passed on to the region. Next slide, please. Well, who are these stakeholders and what are their roles and responsibilities? Well, first off, we have the Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, or WisDOT, the sponsor, or LPA, as I mentioned before, and the design firm, which is hired by the local sponsor. And the two most critical in this of these stakeholders are the local sponsor and the design firm the local sponsor hires. FHWA is responsible for providing the funding and oversight of WisDOT in managing these projects and use of federal funds. WisDOT is responsible for administering and the oversight of these FHWA funds, not delivering your project and not maintaining the schedule with the designer you hired. When it comes to issue resolution, WisDOT encourages the resolution of any issue at the lowest possible level. For example, if the sponsor is concerned with the timely review, completion or delivery of any of these products during the development of the project, we're talking about the design of the project, the first step in that resolution is to have a dialogue between the sponsor and the design firm they've hired. Get the facts, review your schedule, and be prepared if this issue has to be elevated to WisDOT to have those discussions. But the design firm and or local sponsor should not automatically call WisDOT to resolve these issues. Now let's talk a little bit more about these shareholders and their responsibilities. Next slide, please. First off is FHWA. FHWA provides the majority of the funding for the local programs as mentioned prior. FHWA has direct oversight delegated to WisDOT through the Stewardship and Oversight Agreement, and that agreement is signed by WisDOT and FHWA. FHWA retains some direct oversight responsibilities. They sign environmental documents and approve them. If you're using federal funds on real estate, they may be involved in that process. And if you're using federal funds and you provide 100% locally funded oversight or pay for your real estate, they may review that real estate transaction as well. FHW provides oversight of WisDOT's administration and reviews that oversight on a regular basis. Next slide, please. Next up is WisDOT, Wisconsin Department of Transportation. And their major responsibility or role is the awarding and approving of the local program projects. We review change management requests. WisDOT provides limited oversight of the design and the construction projects. WisDOT creates and maintains the Facilities Development Manual, or FDM, and the environmental guidelines and the documents necessary for environmental approvals. WisDOT provides a cursory review of products produced by the sponsor and the designer. WisDOT reviews real estate processes and acquisition of these of the parcels on these projects when necessary. WisDOT does do tracking of the schedule of projects because they are state let, and WisDOT does provide oversight of let projects. What WisDOT's not responsible for is the quality control of these projects, of these products. Please be aware of that. A lot of that emphasis is now on the LPA or local sponsor and the designer. Next slide, please. Next up is the sponsor or the local public agency, or LPA, as referred to. They own the project. They applied for the project. These projects are on their systems, be it a county, a city, a village, or a town. The local sponsor takes a lead in the scoping and design of the project, both in the application phase and after the project's approved. The LPA hires the design consultant. Matt Van Natta will be talking a little bit more about that in the next section of this presentation, be it a two-party or three-party contract. The sponsor leads public involvement process. These are projects in your community. You know these communities very well. They're responsible for adhering to local program and WisDOT FDM procedures and processes. They're responsible for quality control reviews of the documents during the design process. And they're specifically responsible for real estate acquisition, utilities, both public and private, in the project area, and railroad clearances. Remember that if a railroad's within 1,000 feet of your project, it has to be identified, and we have to deal with issues concerning the railroad. Also, if the railroad is directly in your project area, it could add up to 2 years to your project. Next slide, please. Lastly is the design firm. The design firm, as I mentioned before, is contracted by the local sponsor, LPA. The design firm needs to be on WisDOT's eligibility roster. It has to be an eligible firm to do business, especially with federal aid projects or any of the programs that are approved and you're going to use funds for. The design firm reports directly to the local sponsor regularly, and especially when issues arise. And the design firm is knowledgeable with policies and procedures. I would highly recommend that if you hire a design firm, they have delivered a federal aid project or have worked in the local programs prior to your hiring that firm. And lastly, the design firm is responsible for the quality of the plan. Is it biddable and is it buildable? It's very important and crucial to a successful project. Next slide, please. Now we're going to review the delegation of approval authority matrix. And this document's very important. As we discussed, the management consultants are no longer assisting in the delivery of these projects. This document will be sent to the LPA when a project is approved or when the state municipal agreement is sent out. It outlines most of the activities and tasks associated with a local program project and who is responsible for the approval, concurrence, and review of that specific activity or task. It is very specific and very detailed. It is important to review and understand these tasks and activities once your project is approved. This document is also available on our WisDOT website, and I suggest you may want to look at it to get an idea what's involved with a local program project. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to briefly talk about local or metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs. MPOs and regional planning commissions, or RPCs, are urbanized or urban areas determined by population density. MPOs are in single counties. Regional planning commissions can cross multiple counties, or in contiguous areas may cross state boundaries. Wisconsin has 18 urbanized areas which receive an annual allocation of STP urban funding based on funds available as approved by the state biannual budget. MPOs, RPCs approve their own projects within their areas when program funds are allocated by WisDOT. Funds need to be programmed during each program cycle and cannot be reserved for cost increases or carried over to the next program cycle. Of these 18 areas located throughout our state, 6 are transportation management areas, or TMAs, with populations of 200,000 or greater, and 12 have populations between 50 and 200,000. Next slide, please. Lastly, because MPO allocations are defined by both population and the amount of funding available, approved project funding is limited at approval, and these projects are ineligible for the change management process for additional funds. If they do need to change their schedule, or there's a slight variation in the scope, that would be a change management request and would need to be approved by WisDOT. There's also small urban areas within the STP urban program, and there's 2 categories of those urban areas. Those with populations between 5 and 20,000, and then there's 20 to 50,000 population. They receive entitlements similar to local bridge and STP rural program. And their funding is based on population and eligible centerline miles within their urban areas. But they do not approve their projects, and these projects go through a ranking and rating process similar to local bridge and STP urban, or STP rural, excuse me. Wisconsin has 52 of these urban areas throughout the state, and these projects, as stated before, are eligible for additional funding through change management if funds are available at the time of the request. But one thing I want to emphasize before I transition to the project development area is that change management is available, but it's based on specific engineering-based requests and are if funds available. Funding is not available to a project sponsor for any of these programs if they underestimated the total cost of the project at approval, or the scope change is extreme after approval. That is not a legitimate reason for an increase in funding, and that reason will be denied by WisDOT through a change management request. So next on is Matt Van Netta talking about the project development process, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As Michael said, I'm Matt Van Netta, Local Program Project Manager from the Northwest Region out of the Superior Office. Today I'll be talking about the project delivery and development process. I'll be focusing a lot on consultant selection and some of the major milestones in the WisDOT design process. The delivery stage starts when the SMA, which is the state municipal agreement, is signed by both parties. This is a confidential agreement between the state and the local government. This should not be shared with any other parties. It is an agreement on scope and the fund estimate for the project. The funding limit, this is the funding limit unless the project is eligible for change management in the future time in the project. After the SMA is signed, the project can be authorized to incur costs by the department. Although the designer can already be selected at this point, work cannot begin on the project until it is authorized and the design contract is signed and approved by the department. There are two main ways to select a consultant. First, if a project is 100% locally funded, the local government can use its own selection process to select a designer. If a federal or state funds are on the project, the QBS process, which stands for Quality-Based Selection, is required. This is required because of the Brooks Act, which basically mandates that any federally funded projects have consultants selected through objective, quality-based criteria. This means that cost cannot be used as criteria for selecting a design firm. For more reference on the QBS process, please follow links for the FDM on this slide and take a look at the presentation on the website, the link found on this slide as well. Next slide, please. The first step in the QBS process is developing a selection committee. Now, although there's really no real cap on who can be on that committee, this committee must consist of a minimum of 3 voting members on a local's applicable governing board. For example, this could be a highway committee or just a general town board. After that committee has been developed, that committee must develop objective criteria for rating and ranking of the consultants. An example of some of the rating and ranking criteria that you can use can be found by following the FDM attachment on this slide. But once again, cost cannot be used as a criteria in selection. Furthermore, the originator, who is in this case the local government, must maintain all documentation for a minimum of 3 years. As a general rule of thumb for any point in a WisDOT project, it is good to remember that if it's not documented, it didn't happen. There are 3 general levels of projects in the QBS process. The simplest and most commonly used is a small purchase procedure. The small purchase procedure can be used if design costs are expected to be less than $200,000. In this case, the local government must contact a minimum of 3 consultants. If a project is expected to cost more than $200,000, the local government must use the full FDM process for consultant selection, in which case they must use a formal roster such as the DOT's consultant roster or maybe a locally maintained roster with a minimum of 10 consultants. For the rare case where a design project may cost over $1 million, an interview panel with the prospective consultants is required, and the DOT must be on that panel. Now, since a majority of projects will use the small purchase procedure, I wanted to go in that a little bit deep with a little bit more detail. Starting from the beginning of the selection process, the first step of the small purchase procedure is to identify the scope of the project. This can be easily determined from reviewing your application or the SMA. Second, the selection committee must develop a list of criteria for ranking the consultants. Once that criteria has been developed, the local must contact a minimum of 3 consultants via an RFP, which stands for Request for Proposal. Once the RFP is sent out, all communication with the consultants must be documented and maintained. Once the RFPs have been reviewed and received by the local government, the rating and ranking committee must get back together to select the consultant. Once again, bidding is not allowed. Furthermore, another thing to remember is to check to make sure that a design consultant does not have a conflict of interest with the project. An example of which would be if a city has a consultant on contract as a city engineer, then that consultant is not eligible to compete in the QBS process. Once your firm has been selected, the local government will need to fill out the DT 1515 local design selection form. This form should be provided to you by your local program project manager, also known as your LPPM. Once you've finished filling it out, submit it back to your LPPM, who will forward it back to central office for approval. Once your designer selection has been approved, written contact with the selected consultant and all of the non-selected consultants must be made to inform them of your decision. After that has happened, you should work with your regional LPPM to schedule a design scoping meeting. And after that meeting, the DOT and the local will negotiate a design contract with that consultant. Work can then begin on the contract once the contract is approved and signed by the DOT. Next slide, please. The first major milestone in the WisDOT design process occurs about 30%. This is when your environmental document should be signed. Is at this point that the final scope should be defined and all of your environmental impact should also be defined. Some of this can be figured out through coordination with regulatory agencies such as the U.S. Army Corps or the DNR, to name a couple. This is the first chance to get a good look at your budget since the SMA has been signed. If change management appears to be needed, this is a very good time to do it, because the earlier you ask for change management, the better chance that it would be approved. Also at this point, contact with utilities should be made within the project area to determine any potential impacts on those utilities. Also, as Michael alluded to earlier, any rail coordination through your rail coordinator should also be made. This is important for any project with a rail interest within 1,000 feet of the project. This includes any potential detours that might happen because of the project. Also, because it's reported in the environmental document, any real estate needs will also be defined. Finally, at the 30% stage, preliminary bridge plans or structure plans will need to be approved by the Bureau of Structures. Next slide, please. The next major step is at around 60%, when the design study report should be signed. This is the beginning of final design. It is at this point that your traffic management plan should be approved by your local program project manager. Also, a 60% plan should be submitted to you, the local, and the DOT for review. The comments should be addressed by the designer, but still, the plan quality still rests on the local government and the consultant. It is at this point that any prospective rail and utility agreements should be well on their way to being finalized. And also, if your project has real estate needs, the plat should be recorded and real estate acquisition can begin once the plat is recorded and the DSR is signed. One of the last major steps in the WisDOT design process happens about 90%, which is also known as pre-PS&E. Pre-PS&E stands for Plan, Specification, and Estimate. This is basically your entire plan package. At this point, your plans should be basically in their final form. Your designer will submit those to the local government and the DOT for comments and review. But once again, design responsibility still rests with the consultant and the local government. It is at this point that your designer should have a very accurate estimate. This is one of the last good times to ask for change management if your project is eligible. Your designer will also start drafting their project certifications for rail, real estate, and utilities. It is at this point that your agreement should be pretty much finalized with those groups. Your designer will also request a DNR for final concurrence for any potential environmental impacts that your project will cause. And finally, if your project has structure plans, you will need to have your designer submit those structure plans to Bureau of Structures 60 days ahead of final PS&E. Next slide, please. The PS&E date, which is when you submit your final plan package to proposal management in Madison. This is at which point all of your certifications for real estate, railroad, and your USR, which stands for Utility Status Report, should be cleared for letting and signed. Failure to achieve cert clearance at this point could jeopardize the letting of your project. Next slide, please. After a project has been submitted to central office, we review to make sure your project is clear for letting. Bureau of Project Development does one last review for plan biddability. Once a project is clear for letting, it'll be advertised ahead of your letting date. On the letting date, contractors bid on how much they will build a project for. However, if a project is bid at 5% or more over the engineer's estimate, the designer must provide justification and the local must have concurrence to award the project. If a low bid is under the engineer's estimate by more than 10%, the designer will still need to have justification for reason for awarding the project. A couple other things to note. The DOT during construction hires a different consultant to oversee the construction through a two-party contract between that consultant and the DOT. Also, from this year on, federally funded projects with any DBE goals, which stands for Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, will be enforced before a contractor is awarded a project. Lastly, for locally let projects, please refer to the Sponsors Guide and Training for instructions on how to locally let a project. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask and reach out to your local project manager above. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. Now we would like to transition over to Statewide T Program Manager Dave Carlson, who will be giving an overview of Transportation Economic Assistance Grants. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Merrill, and welcome everybody attending the symposium today. My name is Dave Carlson. I am the Transportation Economic Assistance Manager in the Bureau of Planning and Economic Development. We're in the Division of Transportation Investment Management at DOT. Next slide, please. So this morning, I'd like to talk about a couple of economic development programs within DOT that can help your local community and help local businesses to drive your economy. I'm going to talk about two grant and loan programs. The first is the Transportation Economic Assistance, or T program, and the second will be the State Infrastructure Bank, or SIB. Next slide, please. I'll start with T. The goal of the T program is to promote economic prosperity in Wisconsin communities by creating new jobs and retaining jobs. And the way we do this specifically is that we support transportation infrastructure projects needed to bring businesses to Wisconsin and or help them expand here. Next slide, please. We receive $3.4 million a year in funding through the state budget process, and we accept applications for T assistance
on a continual basis. So you've heard already about some programs that have certain application windows. You don't need to worry about that with T, as you have a eligible project need that pops up. You can apply, and as long as we have available funds, which we do right now, we will review and evaluate and make a decision on your application in a timely manner. We can fund road, rail, airport, and harbor projects. Most common are rail and road, though. Next slide, please. So how much you get is really based on looking at a few different things, but essentially, if a business is going to create and or retain jobs, we can fund up to $5,000 per new and or retained job. However, a grant amount cannot exceed 50% of project costs or a maximum grant of $1 million. So just a real quick example of how you would maximize and get a $1 million grant. It would be a business that would be creating and or retaining 200 jobs at $5,000 per job to get to the million. And you would need to have a transportation project that was at least $2 million to get that $1 million grant. Next slide, please. Some of the major things that need to be part of a T application include 30% design plans. You've heard reference to those previously this morning. There also needs to be a review of archaeological and historical resources in compliance with Section 44.40 of Wisconsin statutes. And the business that will be creating and or retaining the jobs to qualify the community for the T grant will need to provide business financials. A full checklist of the entire T process, as well as the documentation that's necessary in an application, is available on the DOT website at the link on your screen. Next slide, please. We did have a record-setting year for T in 2020. We awarded 11 grants in total, representing $5.2 million in financial assistance to local communities to support the creation of 1,000 new jobs in Wisconsin and the retention of 716 additional jobs. And we also managed, by supporting those communities with $5.2 million in T funds, to leverage $848.7 million in private investment, representing the cost of construction of new manufacturing facilities or expanded facilities. Next slide, please. Here's just a couple of examples on the extreme ends of the spectrum in terms of what we funded for T in 2020. So this picture represents the new Komatsu Mining Corporation's headquarters and manufacturing facility that's being constructed in the South Harbor district of the city of Milwaukee. You can see in the photo the structure that's going up. This was a early winter shot. It's progressed quite a bit since then, but that's a new facility. And then you can see the train track sort of bisecting the property left to right in the middle. This project will actually receive two T grants totaling $1.7 million. One is to do some rail access work, and the other one will be to do some road work necessary to access the property. This project alone accounted for 679 retained jobs and the creation of 240 new jobs. So we do fund big projects, but next slide, we also do fund some smaller projects. And in fact, we love smaller projects because they can make a huge difference in their communities. And this is an example of a project in Bayfield County that we approved last year. It was a $70,000 grant to convert a section of County Highway E, which you see here in the photo, to an all-season road to better serve White River ag products. They previously had to do seasonal layoffs in the spring, late winter, early spring, when the road was posted with load limits. And that was not good for their business. And furthermore, they wanted to add a new hemp press to their manufacturing process, but they were not going to make that commitment unless the road could be all-season road because of the need to call in some larger shipments of product. So by supporting this project, and you see here, this project got completed just in time for the first snowfall last year, we were able to support the creation of 10 new jobs and the retention of those 4 jobs that I mentioned that previously were subject to seasonal layoffs. So there's no project that's big or too small for T funding. Next slide, please. Now I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the State Infrastructure Bank. This is the other major grant program that we operate in the economic development section. So the State Infrastructure Bank offers communities loans and credit options to help finance eligible surface transportation projects. These funds are to help make improvements that preserve, promote, and encourage economic development and or promote transportation efficiency, safety, and mobility. So it's a pretty broad definition, and that's intentional to be able to include a lot of different types of needs and communities. Next slide, please. The SIB offers low interest rates. We can finance a project for up to 30 years, so generate really low payments for communities. It is a revolving loan fund, so the availability of funds depends on repayment of previously loaned funds. We currently have a balance of a little over $400,000 available right now. And this is a program that was initially created with federal matching funds of 80% and state matching funds of 20%. Next slide, please. Again, this is just intended to be a real general overview of these 2 programs, but if you do have projects in your local communities that seem to fit our criteria there, I encourage you to reach out and contact me. My contact information is listed on the slide here and will be available in the presentations that will be posted online. You can email me at t@dot.wi.gov or directly to david.carlson@dot.wi.gov, or give me a phone call. Numbers listed on the screen, and we'd be happy to set up a time to talk with you and representatives of your local community about your potential T or SIB project. And I will be sticking around later to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dave. We're going to do one more presentation and then take a quick break. Our next presentation, we have Statewide Highway Safety Improvement Program Manager Mike Finkenbinder, who's going to be giving an overview of HISSUP. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Merrill. As Merrill mentioned, my name is Mike Finkenbinder. I'm the Highway Safety Improvement Program Manager for WisDOT. I'm located out of central office down in Madison. Next slide, please. So I'll be talking about the Highway Safety Improvement Program today, also known as HSIP or HISSUP. It's a program that looks for projects that reduce the number and severity of crashes on all public roads. And the focus is on infrastructure improvements identified through a data-driven approach. And our real focus is on fatal and serious injury crashes. And again, it's for infrastructure improvements. There are other funding sources and programs that focus on behavioral issues or enforcement issues, but HISSUP is for infrastructure. Lower cost treatments should be given first consideration, and the intent there is to, if we have a low cost improvement that we can get out there in a timely manner, that's what we want to look to get the safety measure in place as soon as we can. It also includes the high risk rural roads sub-program, and that funds projects for construction and operational improvements on county rural major and minor collectors. So it's really geared towards county trunk highways at this point in time. Next slide, please. So funding for the program, it's a federal reimbursement program, not a grant program. It's a 90-10 split, so 90% of the funds are the federal side, and then 10% would be a match for the project sponsor. So if it's a state project, the state pays the match, and then for local sponsored projects, the local is responsible for 10% of the project costs. Next slide, please. Program cycle and application deadlines. We currently are set up as a 4-year program for projects. We do allow some programming of projects into years 5 and 6 for projects with more complicated delivery schedules, or if there's real estate or environmental issues We do allow exceptions into year 5 and 6, but we try and stick towards the 4 years as best we can. There's 2 application cycles a year, one in the spring, one in the fall. Our current program is state fiscal 21 to 24. But as you know, we're coming up on a new fiscal year here come July 1st. So the next deadline, which is August 15th of 2021, will start the state fiscal 22 to 25 program cycle. Next slide, please. Some typical eligible projects. So we kind of look at this 2 different ways. There's kind of spot projects and corridor level projects. Some examples of spot projects are intersection safety improvements, so installing or modifying signals, roundabouts, etc. Straightening isolated curves, whether it be vertical or horizontal, improving sight distance, installing signs, pavement markings, delineators, etc. Some corridor level projects would be corridor signal upgrades, so we can still do signal upgrades, but if it's 3 or 4 along the same corridor, we view those as corridor rather than a spot improvement. Roadway diets, 2-way left turn lanes or twiddles are also corridor improvements that we see through the program. Pavement markings and rumble strips above current standards. So if you have a project that current standards requires pavement marking rumble strips, then we can't fund it through HSIP. But if we have above and beyond the current standards, really something just being put in to increase safety, then we can look at funding that through HISIP. Next slide, please. Application requirements. So there's a list of some of the documentation that we look to see with the applications. The application form is the DT 1501. You can get a copy of that out on our public website, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. We also require a general sketch of the project, collision diagrams, crash history. We look at the most recent 5 years, and the crash history is something that needs to accompany the application. Site photos, an itemized cost estimate, and then the project evaluation factor, the PEF. That's something that is completed by WisDOT, but some of the other materials listed above there are needed to complete that. So not something that the locals need to worry about, but something that does factor into the analysis of the projects. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, how we analyze is kind of based on that PEF. The region staff, as I mentioned, puts that together, and then it's used to evaluate and compare projects to one another. Estimates, the PEF estimates the crash reduction potential of the proposed improvements and compares it to the total project cost. So some of the things that go into that are the cost estimate, which is why we need that itemized cost estimate. The crash history, as I mentioned before, we look at the last 5 years. And then what it does is identifies crashes and severity of the crashes that the proposed improvement would fix. So if you're putting in a proposed improvement, it might not address all crashes at a location. So we're just going to look at the ones that the proposed improvement would address. And then we look at other studies and research as far as what has that specific improvement, how has that reduced crashes in other areas of the state and of the nation. So that's how we kind of estimate the reduction. Next slide, please. Funding caps. So as I mentioned, it's a 90-10 program. So we put a cap on the federal side at the start of the project. Some of the basics of the cap is all of our HISIP projects have caps put on them. Local projects, the overages are charged to the locals. So if the actual costs come in and it's higher than what was anticipated, the cap is still going to stay in place, and any overages the local would be responsible for. Any funding cap increase must be approved by the statewide HISIP coordinator, HISIP manager, which is me. So we can increase the cap if we have a justification, adequate justification for that. So if you have a scenario where you you're going through the design or whatnot, and you find out that you need to alter it a little bit and increase quantities or whatnot, you can submit a justification to increase the cap so that you're not stuck with as much of the overage, and that will be reviewed and approved accordingly. However, if the change is significant enough that it's changing the scope, it's really a resubmittal to the review committee for approval. Some benefits are it encourages better project scoping, promotes more accurate and initial cost estimates, and it helps limit impacts on the program. It helps us manage the program better and keep a good list of projects. Next slide, please. Copay requirement. This is for the larger projects. As I mentioned, the smaller type projects are priority, but we do allow larger size projects in as well. So if we have a project over 1.9 million, then a copay is triggered. So the first 1.9 million is that 90-10 split that I mentioned earlier. And then the second 1.9 million is it's non-HISP funds. So it would be the complete responsibility of the local or the state, whoever's sponsoring the project. And then if you have a large enough project to where it goes over 3.8 million, then it's a split between HISP funds and local funds. And this really is just to ensure that we're not spending all of our HISP funds on one or two extremely large projects. So it helps us kind of divide it up throughout the state. Next slide, please. Sunset provision. This is a policy where we perform an annual review to check the status on previously approved projects. And we reserve the right to remove them from the program if there's been no design action within 2 years or it's not let to contract within 3 years. It's really just to make sure that we're not tying up HISP funds with projects that aren't moving forward. There will be adequate communication with the local prior to removal of funds. We're going to try and work with you as much as we can to deliver the projects. If it was approved, it's a good safety project in our eyes and we want it to be delivered. So we're going to do what we can to not have to remove those funds. So there will be notice given if it does get to that point. Benefits are it ensures that safety resources are only reserved for viable projects and enables adding projects to the program if we have one that isn't moving forward. Next slide, please. For more information, as I mentioned, we have a HISP page out on the public website. So if you go to the public wisconsin.dot.gov website, there's a banner across the top with a number of drop downs. Safety is one of those, and you can find the HISP page under that drop down. As I mentioned, the application material and a few other program materials are linked on that website. And then you could also contact WisDOT HISP staff. Each region has its own HISP coordinator and safety engineers. So for general program information, you could contact the region HISP coordinator. For questions specific about specific safety improvements or whatnot, you can contact the region safety engineers. For general program information, feel free to contact me. My contact information is listed on this slide and is also on the website. Next slide, please. Here's a list of the region HISP coordinators. As I mentioned, each region has one. Southwest has one, and Southeast has a couple, and Northeast has two. You would be looking to Sandy Carpenter. She handles the local side of things. Next slide, please. And then the regional safety engineers. Each region has one, except for Southwest has two, one out of the La Crosse office, one out of the Madison office, and then Southeast also has two. So any specific safety improvement type fixes, questions can go to the region safety engineers. And that's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. All right, doing a quick time check. We're running a couple couple minutes over, but we are still going to take a quick break here. I have about 10:30 on my clock. We will return at 10:35 and transition over into a presentation from the University of Wisconsin. Okay, welcome back, everybody. At this point, we would like to turn things over to Ben Jordan and Andy Bill from the University of Wisconsin Transportation Information Center. Welcome, Ben and Andy.
Thank you, Merrill. And thank you to WisDOT for allowing us to take a few minutes on the program to talk about the Transportation Information Center and some of the resources we can provide to you as local governments. Next slide, please. TIC is one of 51 local technical assistance programs. There's one in every state and in Puerto Rico. This is a Federal Highway Administration program that was created in 1982 to provide training and technical assistance to local street and highway agencies related to their roads and their bridges. And TIC was founded in 1983, and it is funded by Federal Highway Administration and WisDOT, and we're housed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the College of Engineering. Next slide, please. TIC serves the over 1,900 units of local government in Wisconsin, counties, cities, villages, and towns. Next slide, please. We provide training to local street and highway agencies. We provide scheduled training on topics including highway safety, work zone safety, flagger training, PACER pavement condition ratings, pavement maintenance and winter maintenance, and other topics as well. We also offer on-site training upon request to groups. One of the most common requests we get is work zone traffic control and flagger training for your field staff at your municipality. Next slide, please. In addition to that technical training, we also offer some certificate programs designed to provide some basic supervisory and management training for first-line supervisors. Next slide, please. These programs are the Public Works Supervisory Academy and the Public Works Management Institute. We work in cooperation with Wisconsin chapter of American Public Works Association to provide these programs. The PWSA is 9 one-day training courses, and PWMI adds an additional 36 hours of training beyond those initial 9 days. And that PWMI program is approved by National APWA under its Institutes program. So the types of training we offer here are things related to communication, supervision, finance and budgeting, personnel, all the things that a first-line supervisor needs to know that they may have not picked up based on their technical background, but they need these skills to progress in their career, to develop themselves. Next slide, please. I mentioned work zone training and I mentioned pavement maintenance training. We have some publications and resources related to those topics and other topics. Our work zone guidelines, which is a flip book that can be brought out into the field to help your crews set up work zone traffic control correctly. Our flagger handbook, which also is useful for training of flaggers. Our PACER pavement condition rating manuals for each of the pavement types are used to rate the pavement condition through a visual assessment of the pavement surface. In addition, we offer a series of transportation bulletins on particular maintenance topics, safety topics, things like signing, marking, weight limits, winter maintenance operations, a number of topics where we have short 4 to 8 page publications that give you basic information you need to know about the topic. Next slide, please. It was mentioned early on that TIC can be a resource for you in preparing for applications. Merrill had mentioned cost estimating and mentioned us as a potential resource there. And we're a good resource for that in terms of pointing you to resources and giving you some information on how to do those preliminary estimates for your project applications. We can't do the estimate for you, but we can be a great resource to get you on the right track. And we're going to talk in the next few slides about some other resources that we have that are going to be important as you're thinking about your safety on your highways, as you're and your streets, as you're thinking about condition of those assets. And the first of those we'll highlight is the PACER pavement condition rating and the Whistler web-based pavement management software. And I think Many people on the call know that you're responsible to do pavement ratings as a local government every 2 years and report those to WisDOT. This is an odd numbered year, so every odd numbered year by December 15th, those ratings are due. And so they're due by this December 15th. You do not have to wait till the fall to rate your pavements. You just need to rate them every 2 years. And we do have the resources to help you do that pavement rating. WisDOT hosts the Whistler web-based system on their website. This is the tool that you use to submit your ratings. And it's also a tool that serves as an inventory of your pavement assets. And we will be doing training this summer in cooperation with WisDOT on Pacer and Whistler. So look for announcements from TIC as we get that scheduled. Likely it will be in July or August. Next slide, please. When you do utilize Whistler, I think it's very important to do more than just utilize it as a reporting tool for pavement condition. Merrill mentioned earlier on that Whistler has tools for mapping, so you can map condition for your 5-year pavement program. You can map a specific project, a specific location for an application. You can use the pavement management tools to develop your 5-year program, and is shown on the left-hand side an output from a run of a 5-year budget projection. And you can get graphical information to visually show the condition rating as you see in the condition distribution on the lower right side of the slide. Next slide, please. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Andy Bill, and Andy's going to talk about some of the traffic safety and crash data resources and some of our partnerships and technical assistance.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. So as we've heard lots about, getting the data and looking at it, another opportunity for us is to look at the crash data. So at the university, through the Traffic Operations and Safety Laboratory, we have access to the crash data. There is 2 different types of web applications for it. There's the WisTrans portal one. There's also community maps. Both are fed with the same data feed. We're both available to answer any questions that you have as well of that information. So if you don't already have a login, that first arrow is pointing to data services. You can request a login information for it. And then the second arrow down there is pointing to web applications. This is going to get you information to the WisTrans portal data retrieval tool, as well as community maps. Next slide, please. So you can see here the different tools for the crash data. You could also get to, through our memorandum of understanding with the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, we also provide the actual crash report forms out to local agencies. So not only can you see where their crashes are happening, but you can actually drill down into to see what are the factors that are happening and read the police narratives, as well as looking at the diagrams to determine, what is actually happening out there on your roadway. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, we also do provide technical assistance. So we provide answers to questions dealing with street and highway issues. We can provide assistance to you or refer you to others that can be able to help. We can do it through phone or email, or in this virtual environment as well too. We can do a quick Zoom call or a Teams call to be able to look to see what's happening out there on your roadways and be able to help you. Next slide. One thing that's really important for us is the cooperatively working with our partners. So we work with the Wisconsin County Highway Association, Wisconsin Town Association, League of Wisconsin Municipalities, APWA, and ITE as well. So looking at all together. Next slide. And to wrap it up, here is our contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us for any questions that you might have. We can be able to answer your questions for you or point you in the right direction. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you to WisDOT for allowing us to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And I will add one more comment. If you are reaching out to us for technical assistance or using those tools in relation to preparing a project application, make sure you do it in advance so that you're not fighting a deadline and competing with other people for the limited resources we have. We do want to assist you, but it's difficult when you reach out just before a project deadline.
Yep, great advice, Ben. Great advice. Ben, Andy, thank you so much for your time today. And with that, we would now like to move over to FHWA team leader and local programs coordinator, Tracy Duvall, who's going to be giving us the FHWA's perspective. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you, Merle, and good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Tracy Duvall, and I'm the local programs coordinator here in Federal Highway Administration, Wisconsin Division, located in Madison, Wisconsin. Next slide, please. So the next slide is just a roadmap of some of the things that I'll be talking about. I do want to take a moment to say thank you to WisDOT for the opportunity to be here today. And thank you for all of you for being here to tune in and some of the helpful information as WisDOT kick off a new program cycle. Next slide. So just a quick highlight, Linda earlier during her welcome remarks talked about our funding authorization. I just want to put it out there for those of you who are curious to see what our focus areas are on a national level. Our funding authorization does end at the end of September, but we're hoping that DC definitely has something in place to come on board when the new federal fiscal year starts on October the 1st. I also listed some authorities as it relates to local program. It's not an overview of all the federal requirements, but some of the highlights, just in case if you want some free reading on the weekend. Next slide. I do want to take a moment to talk about the oversight flow structure. Some of the previous presenters talked about it, but this is an area that is extremely important to us. Federal Highway Administration, Wisconsin Division, we do have an office in every state, primarily in the state capital. We're actually not that far from WisDOT Central Office. The money flows through the DOT, in this case, Wisconsin Department of Transportation, WisDOT. They are a direct recipient. Unlike other federal agencies, they may have multiple recipients, but for Federal Highway Administration, our primary recipients is the DOT. And then our funding flows through the local agencies. At the end of the day, we're all partners to ensure that we're delivering compliant and quality products out here in our transportation system. But I do want to go over the oversight flow, and we have a lot of program managers here in Madison that is working with WisDOT Central Office and sometimes the regions as well to help administer the program and as well as understanding our federal requirements. Next slide. I would like to focus on some of the key focus areas for success, especially when it comes to local program. We talk about this throughout the country. And Federal Highway, we stand behind some of these key areas as it comes to partnering locally to administer federally assisted projects. The first one is technical assistance. There are numerous resources out there that provide technical assistance. At my last slide, I'll have some national links on there if you'd like to learn more. This platform, this symposium that's taking place right now is an example of technical assistance where program managers come together and talk about requirements, deadlines, and how to contact us if you have any information. So please be on the lookout. We understand sometimes there's turnover, there's new team members coming in board to the local agency. So please always have that part of an ongoing cycle to always serve as a refresher or some trainings when new employees come on board. The second thing I would like to focus on for areas for success is early communication and coordination. We completely understand that things are always moving fast, but the key to a successful project is early communication and coordination, reaching out on a timely basis. You know, the deadlines are published, aware of the process, so that way you're reaching out. In this particular case of the regions, when you have need any information or be redirected for clarity, so that way that doesn't impact the project schedule moving forward. And then the last thing, you probably heard it and from the previous presenters, and I'm sure you'll hear throughout the rest of this symposium, is documentation, documentation, documentation. I know that may sound a little cliche, but for the federal government and even as public servants of federal funds, we have to ensure that we have documentation to describe how and what were the decision made in making those processes as it comes to delivering a project. If it's not documented, normally the rule of thumb is it didn't happen, or we do not have the methodology to support our approvals when it comes to a certain action. So it's very key as a local agency to definitely give that some thought. What is your documentation process? A lot of local agencies are going through to electronic format versus the paper. Whatever method that works best for your organization, please ensure that the documentations are there. So that way, when WisDOT or Federal Highway or any other federal agency that may come in auditing or reviewing a project, the information is readily available for us to access. Next slide, please. Another area I would like to put an emphasis on is the local program agency certification program. This is not unique to Wisconsin, it's all the way across the country. The purpose of the certification program is, once again, the DOT, in this particular case, WisDOT, is our direct recipient. However, WisDOT came into an agreement with Federal Highway to allow some projects to be administered by the local agency. In that particular case, that unit or that responsible person is supposed to go through the certification program, and that would mean the responsible charge. It is a public employee of the local agency, so I do recognize sometimes there's a lot of consulting in play, especially when it comes to the design aspect. However, the responsible charge is a public employee of the local agency, and they're responsible for all the oversight and the day-to-day operation of the project, especially when inquiries or information is requested by the DOT, or in this particular case, WisDOT or Federal Highway Administration. Now, the certification program is required to go over federal and state requirements to administer a compliant project. And once again, the certification program, which there's more information about it if you reach out to your region, as well as WisDOT public website, is applicable to locally led projects only, so TAP and CMAC. So some of the other projects that are state-led, in that particular case, WisDOT is serving as their responsible charge to administer that project. Next slide, please. Okay, with that being said, I don't want to take too much of your time. I do want to go over some of the resources to get started. We definitely market them all the time. They're still relevant. The first one is Federal Aid Essentials for local public agencies. They have over 100 videos, very high level key points divided by program areas. This is a great tool, resources to train new employees, as well as a refresher. Even though you've been doing federal aid projects for a while, there's always need for a refresher, and then new videos are uploaded as they become available. The second thing is LTAP. You guys definitely heard from the Wisconsin LTAP. There is one in every state. The purpose, once again, is here just to assist local agencies, as well as partner with WisDOT in some of the focus areas. And the last one, and not least, I always like to call it the University for Transportation Professionals, is the National Highway Institute. There are plenty of courses on there online by catalog. Some of them are free, some of them cost, but please feel free to tap into some of these resources as you are equipping your staff and your team on some of the federal requirements, as well as a refresher. So once again, these resources are available. If you guys have any question, feel free to reach out to WisDOT. And once again, Federal Highway, we're here to assist WisDOT. So we work with them on a regular basis, especially as it relates to technical assistance, to ensure as local agency, you guys have what you need to be successful in administering a federally assisted contract. With that being said, I'll pass the floor back to Merle. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Tracy, for your participation today. I certainly want to echo your comments on the importance of documentation and the documentation process in local programs. Really, it is a key critical component really for any of these projects. So next, we would like to welcome State Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator Jill Morotek-Glazinski, and she's going to be giving an overview of pedestrian and bike considerations on local facilities. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you. Again, I'm the State Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator. I'm located in central office in our Bureau of Planning and Economic Development. So today, I'm going to go through, you can go to the next slide, please. Going to kind of cover here three kind of main points, go over some of the programs and policies, some planning and design resources, as well as education, safety, and outreach materials. Next slide, please. So there are federal and state laws and policies that really focus on incorporating biking and walking facilities and travel modes so that they're integrated into our transportation systems. There's an emphasis on making these facilities into connected networks. It's really an opportunity here to address the needs, the gaps, the deficiencies that maybe we have within the network, begin to really provide travel across the whole system, and be able to provide access to destinations along that and throughout the community. Next slide, please. So as you're going through and developing your projects, you really want to make sure that you are evaluating the options for biking and walking, transportation options for biking and walking. Really, this is an opportunity at times that there are small improvements that can really have a big difference in how we provide biking and walking options. There's also sometimes flexibility in the design to roadways, looking at lane widths, how to repurpose maybe the roadway configuration, how to do safety benefits to improve crossings, things like that. It's also really important that we look at how we can create efficiencies to make it, easier for people to conveniently and safely travel by biking or walking. And really, the decision not to accommodate bicycle and pedestrians should not be the rule. We really want to look at every project as an opportunity to make improvements for biking and walking. And as you've heard throughout these presentations, that if there is decisions where bike and pedestrian facilities are not provided, then you need to document those circumstances as well as the decisions for that. Next slide, please. So looking at some of the planning and design resources that we have, you've also heard quite a bit about different funding options for biking and walking. There's non-infrastructure and infrastructure. Some of the other statewide programs talked about planning, opportunities, development of plans. That really helps not only in standalone projects, but looking at when we do infrastructure projects to know what needs to be provided then for the facility improvement as part of roadway projects. It's really also an opportunity to look at doing some planning and designing for multimodal network connectivity. And I guess we would really also like to stress that this is where you have an opportunity to interconnect, providing connections to transit, to rail, to park and rides. Those are all options too, so that it's more of an integrated system. Next slide, please. There are various planning and design resources that the department has. We have statewide transportation plans and modal plans. We also look to the communities to see what your regional or local planning documents are. Several communities throughout the state also have resolutions or ordinances regarding complete streets. So those are some of the items that are really important to refer to when you're developing and scoping your projects. There's also a variety of different statewide and national design guides to help get into some of the specifics about what we do for designing bike and pedestrian facilities. We also want to make sure that we emphasize that there's ADA compliance. So when we're providing pedestrian facilities, that they also provide ADA. And really that comes a part of the emphasis that we've had, I think that many of you know, about looking at improving, installing or updating curb ramps, specifically when it's part of a roadway project that's defined as an alteration by ADA. We've got all that kind of material in our facilities development manual in the FDM in 1146. We've taken what our project concepts are and match that up with what is the definition of an alteration. So you really want to make sure you look at those materials. And as well, the FDM provides the guidance where, regardless of the improvement strategy, improvement concept, that it's an opportunity to evaluate for bike and pedestrian facilities. Next slide, please. The department also has various safety education and outreach materials. Some of the materials would include crash data. As Andy mentioned, there's community maps. You can take a look at materials that will tell you about bike and pedestrian crashes specifically that you can take a look at. We've also got different training opportunities that we provide, working with regional planning commissions or FHWA, or even just department-led training. And then we also have regional assistance by the department. There are, in each of our regions, bicycle and pedestrian coordinators. So those often are a very good local resource, at least a starting point for you. And then we also just have general safety materials through our Bureau of Transportation at DOT that can be useful to the community as a whole as well. Next slide, please. So hopefully that gives you an overview of where we are with bike and pedestrians. I've given you my contact, and I've also provided our web pages so that you can at least start there on our DOT pages. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jill. Next, we would like to welcome Statewide Utility Engineer Abby Wilson, who will be giving us an overview of utility coordination. Welcome, Abby.
Hi, thanks, Merrill. Again, I'm Abby Williamson, and I'm one of our statewide utility engineers for WisDOT. I work out of our central office in Madison. Next slide, please. So the importance of utility coordination really can't be overstated. Not only do utilities have a statutory right to occupy the public right-of-way, but we are also required by state statute to avoid, to the extent possible, any interference with transmission facilities, which means we should be designing around conflicts whenever possible. Utility companies, especially water and sewer systems, will often plan system upgrades or needed maintenance to coincide with the highway project. So early communication will also really help facilitate those plans. And it is also important to remember that the overall goal should be the lowest total cost for both the state taxpayers as well as the utility ratepayers. So coordinating with utilities to minimize or avoid utility conflicts will really help achieve this goal. Next slide, please. So the next two slides will focus on the overall role of the LPA, design consultant, and WisDOT units will have in local projects. The LPA and their design consultant are ultimately the responsible parties for handling all utility coordination, which includes following any applicable local, state, and federal regulations, as well as guidance included in our WisDOT Guide to Utility Coordination. The LPA and their design consultant should go through the utility coordination task list at the start of the project to determine who is responsible for each item. And the LPA should also keep close communication with the local program project manager, or LPPM, regarding the status of utility coordination throughout design and construction. And once utility coordination is complete, the LPA must finalize all PS&E documents and send a certification of utility coordination to the LPPM. Next slide, please. So the LPA's main contact within WisDOT should be with the LPPM. While the LPPM is not technically responsible for utility coordination, it is still recommended for them to work with the LPA to keep things on track. And they will also be responsible for signing the USR once the LPA has prepared the PS&E documents. And when utility questions arise, the LPA or LPPM should first consult our utility coordination guide and our online resources. But if you still have questions, the regional utility staff will be available to help. But in general, our region utility staff will not be doing reviews of any documents such as utility plans, the right-of-way plat, or the USR. And then in the case of an extensive utility issue, the LPPM can contact me, as I am our central office utility contact for local programs. Next slide, please. So here is just a really brief overview of the utility coordination timeline, which starts with creating a list of utilities in the area and sending them a notice of the upcoming project, which should include general scope of work and anticipated year of construction. Utilities should then be field located and shown on the plan sheets so potential conflicts can be identified. Further in design, a plan set should be shared with utilities that can be used to design their relocations. And once utilities return their proposed relocation plans, these should be reviewed and approved by the LPA or design consultant. After plans have been approved, the next step is to finalize PS&E documents. And finally, the right-of-way should be staked as needed for utility relocations, and the LPA should continue to monitor the status of relocations prior to and during construction. It is also important to invite utilities to early planning or public involvement meetings and to hold utility coordination meetings as needed. Next slide, please. So the utility coordination task list offers more detailed guidance regarding specific tasks that may be necessary on your project. And just note that these tasks are not set in stone, and certain projects may not require every item listed. The LPA and design consultant should work together at the start of each project to complete a new list, and should also communicate with the LPPM at this time just to keep everyone on the same page. And all listed tasks within that task list will be the responsibility of the LPA or the design consultant. Next slide, please. In order for utility companies to design their relocation plans, they should be sent a project plan set with enough detail to fully identify what conflicts their facilities have with the proposed construction. Project plan sets should include at minimum the plan and profile, cross-section, and typical section sheets. And it is also helpful to include storm sewer, signal, lighting and structure plans, as well as the right-of-way plat if these apply to your project. You should try to send the plan set around 60 to 70% design, excuse me, which should allow for a 30-day review timeframe of submitted work plans, as well as additional time for utilities to begin relocations prior to construction. Next slide, please. Now to cover a question many of you may have, is this a Trans 220 project? So generally speaking, Trans 220 only applies to the state trunk highway system, so local roads do not fall under Trans 220. With that being said, WisDOT still highly recommends following the timelines and processes that are laid out in Trans 220, as this helps to keep coordination consistent statewide. Lately, we have been seeing more projects include a mix of state and local roads within the project limits. So again, in this situation, you should be following the general Trans 220 processes, but when it comes to enforcing any responsibilities, such as during utility delays or disputes with the contractor, you cannot enforce Trans 220 rules unless it occurs within state road limits. And then Trans 220 timelines you should keep in mind are for the utility work plan return time. And utilities should have 60 days to return their work plan for resurfacing projects, 90 days for reconditioning, and 120 days for reconstruction projects. Utilities should also get an extra 30 days if they have compensable land rights or are coordinating work with other utilities. Next slide, please. And when reviewing a utility work plan, here are some of the key items to keep in mind. First, it is important to make sure that all potential conflicts have been addressed in the work plan. Also, if the utility has proposed extensive or costly relocations, there may be slight changes that you can make to the roadway design to avoid certain conflicts, such as to storm sewer elevations or altering where beam guard posts are located. Timelines and the staging of relocations are also very important. So you should make sure that each work plan fits with other proposed utility schedules and locations. And if any work is proposed to happen during construction, that it will not conflict with the roadway construction activities at that time. Finally, the utility company is responsible for their relocations. So they shouldn't be including any directives to the contractor within their work plan unless it's a bid item that's been approved in the contract and noted as such. And WisDOT has created a local version of the utility worksheet and recommends that utilities use this as they develop their work plans. Next slide, please. So if necessary on your project, acquiring real estate and releasing utility land rights can cause significant delays. So you definitely want to communicate early with any affected utilities. When releasing utility rights, you should use a quitclaim deed or conveyance of rights when the easement is within fee acquisition, and a temporary construction easement when within a TLE or PLE acquisition. And then on the right, I just have a screenshot of the local version of the core, just to highlight a few important items. So first, you want to make sure that the grantor name is the legal name of the utility, not a doing business as name. And then next, the statutory authority at the top of the document, and the grantee should match the public agency who will be the owner of the acquired lands, and not necessarily who is doing the acquisition. So for example, if the state of Wisconsin is acquiring land for the city of La Crosse, it should show the city of La Crosse as the grantee, and the drop down at the top of the form should indicate the city statute for acquisition. Next slide. So any compensable relocation costs that are going to be included in the contractor's work should be detailed under the real estate acquisition costs section of the SMA as a separate line item labeled as compensable utility costs. Compensable utility work that is to take place outside of the contract should be covered with a utility agreement that typically uses local funding. It's rare to use federal or state funds on a local utility agreement. Any non-compensable costs that are to be included in the contractor's work should be listed under non-participating items and are to be 100% locally funded. And then any non-compensable utility work that will be done by the utility outside of the highway contract is typically just left out of the SMA. Next. Then for clearing a project for lead, our central office utility unit will review the utilities article of the special provisions, the general note sheet, and the utility status report, or USR. So the special provisions should cover the who, what, when, where, and why for how each utility conflict will be addressed. And the WisDOT utility guide, as well as a new document we just created called the LET Review Standards, both include detailed guidance on formatting and common situations you may come across. For the general note sheet, we just check to make sure that all of the utilities listed match what is shown on the USR and within the special provisions. And then for the USR, everything except for the certification and signature boxes on the final page should be filled out by the LPA. And the LPA should then send the USR along with the certification statement shown on this slide to the LPPM, who will then complete the final signature fields. As federal funds are not being used for the low-risk bridge pilot program, an official USR will not be required for those projects, but you do still need to certify that utility coordination is complete. Next. Then it is very important to stay involved with while utilities relocate their facilities, which starts with their permit application. So it can be helpful to send utilities a 30-day reminder prior to their start date if they have not already applied for their permit, just to keep things on track. And it is highly recommended to set up regular check-ins with utility companies to track their work status, and if possible, doing intermittent field checks when utilities are relocating. And prior to the pre-construction meeting, you should also get an update from all utilities on their status and continue check-ins with all utilities that still require relocations during construction. Next. So our utility unit has developed many online resources, including a local program agency tools page, which has links to our utility guide, the task list, the USR, and a job aid on how to fill it out, as well as local program versions of many of the forms that I mentioned today. Then under our utility coordination tools page, you will find the LET review standards, as well as additional job aids and guidance related to land rights and the right-of-way plat. Also, Chapter 18 of the FDM includes additional utility coordination guidance. And finally, at the bottom of the screen, I just have my contact information should you have any additional questions. And with that, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to talk with you all today.
Great. Thank you, Abby. Next, we would like to welcome Southwest Regional Railroad Coordinator Terry Beckman, who will be giving an overview of railroad issue concerns. Welcome, Terry.
Yeah, hi. Hi, thanks, Meryl. Yeah, so my name is Terry Beckman. I'm going to be talking to you today about railroad coordination for local program. And I'm the railroad coordinator and material specialist out of the Southwest Madison office. Next slide, please. So is your project near a railroad? So if you are in with 1,000 feet of a railroad, you need to consider reaching out to your regional railroad coordinator. And you may wonder like, oh, well, what's 1,000 feet from a railroad? So we say basically like if you have a 55-mile-per-hour advanced warning sign, those are typically located 750 feet to 1,000 feet from the crossing. Please note, though, that that is only a screening tool. This does not mean that that railroad work will be required. It just means reach out to your regional railroad coordinator, and they can help determine if railroad work is needed. And by doing that, too, your railroad coordinator will also help prevent timely delays that could possibly arise with railroad coordination. Next slide, please. So project constraints. You cannot gap or just stop your project short of a railroad to avoid railroad coordination. You cannot end your project on one side of the tracks and then the next year finish your project on the other side of the tracks to avoid railroad coordination. And then projects with railroads, they are not simple projects. They don't really fit the streamlined PS&E process. When you're dealing with railroads, you want to add at least a year if you have to deal with the OCR or the Office of Commission of Railroads. The FDM also requires that you submit your submittal package to your regional railroad coordinator 24 months prior to letting. And please note that the more complex the project, the longer coordination is going to take. Next slide, please. So the Office of Commission of Railroads, or the OCR, projects may require a ruling from them. And different scenarios where OCR may be involved is if you're altering the crossing, if warning devices need to be upgraded, or to define and ensure railroad participation in your project. Next slide, please. Here's just a picture of a railroad signal that was put in the parking lane. You know, this makes for an unsafe crossing, and these are just things that we want to avoid. Next slide, please. So facts about railroad signals. They are part of the highway that is maintained by the railroad. So in essence, the public does own them. The state pays about 50% of maintenance cost for every single railroad signal installed in the state, and combined with federal, state, and local funds to pay for installation of every single railroad signal in the state. The only time the railroad would be involved with paying for signals if they were to be making changes to their facility, such as adding a second track or something along those lines. Next slide, please. Here's just another picture of an unsafe crossing. These are definitely things that we want to avoid. Next slide, please. And then here's just another example too, where they pinch the road in at the crossing. And again, these make for unsafe crossing situations. Next slide, please. And then I just threw this one in there. I found it interesting. This was a crossing signal that was installed down south. You know, it had like an air raid siren and neon flashing lights when a train would come. So I just found it interesting and wanted to share. So next slide, please. So the basic railroad guidance. Each railroad has their own requirements, and those requirements change frequently. So that is why you need to reach out to your railroad coordinator. You know, you may have worked with, let's say, UP 1 year, and 5 years down the road, you have another project with them. Chances are things have changed. So yes, please reach out to your regional railroad coordinator. And then railroads provide interstate commerce, which takes precedence over most WisDOT projects. And then policies adopted by one railroad may become adopted by another railroad. Next slide, please. So recent developments with Union Pacific, or UP. So they have gone through massive labor reductions over the last year or so, which has led them to utilizing more consultant services to supplement their staffing needs. They're billing states, not just Wisconsin. So every state that they're in, they're billing them for engineering reviews of the DOT highway projects and bridges. UP is requiring railroad approval for any and all plans that may require something from the railroad, anything from a bridge replacement to just flagging or insurance. Next slide, please. So what does that mean? Unfortunately, it means more costs for the locals. Right now, we don't have any historical data on this, but we are anticipating costs for this work with UP to cost anywhere around $25,000 for their engineering review on a project. Rails and Harbor section, though, they are working with UP to create a PE agreement with Union Pacific so that we can kind of get some historical data and just, you know, to let UP know that we're not an open checkbook and they can't just charge whatever for these engineering agreements. Next slide, please. And then here's a map that shows all the different regional railroad coordinators and what counties they handle. So please reach out to them with questions about railroad within your project. Next slide, please. And then here's my information. Feel free to reach out to me too, and I can always direct you to who, the person you need to talk to in your area. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Terry. Our last presentation today, we have Statewide Local Programs Real Estate Manager Abby Rengel, who is going to be giving an overview of real estate considerations. So welcome, Abby.
Thanks, Merrill. I am the Statewide Local Program Real Estate Manager, and I kind of want to go through some tips and tricks on how to help you have a successful project. WisDOT and FHWA take following our processes and oversight so seriously because of the power government agencies have to take private property without the consent of the owner. The U.S. Constitution put limitations on the power of eminent domain. The Fifth Amendment states, "Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." And the 14th adds, "Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." What is the Uniform Act? We hear about it a lot, and it always comes up when we're talking about real estate on transportation projects. In 1970, the Uniform Act was passed. It's the primary law for acquisition and relocation activities on federal or federally assisted projects and programs. Its purpose is to treat individuals fairly, equitably, and consistently, to encourage acquisition by agreement, and to minimize litigation. The Uniform Act applies when federal dollars are utilized in any phase of a project, not just the right-of-way. Parcels acquired in anticipation of a project must also have followed these requirements, including using the appropriate documents and maintaining parcel files. So let's say you've been working on a project using 100% of your own funding, and you've already been acquiring the right of way that you need. Then you decide you'd like to receive federal funding to help offset the costs. You apply for and receive the funding. You have now been acquiring in anticipation of a federal project. This means that all of the right of way already purchased must have been done in agreement with the Uniform Act. The proof of proper procedures will be required. As Tracy said, documentation, documentation, documentation. Other federal, state, and local laws govern public projects and program activities. The requirements of other federal laws and regulations that affect the process of acquiring private property for public purposes is shown on the screen. In addition, the state has statutes that must be adhered to. Remember, when a local public agency accepts federal or state funding in a transportation project, it's also agreeing to follow not only its regular local government statutes, but all the federal regulations and state statutes that come with that funding. So all this talk about laws and regulations, what does this mean from a real estate standpoint? It means there are certain expectations that come with accepting federal or state money for your project. The LPA is expected to follow the procedures outlined in the Local Program Real Estate Manual and the Statewide Real Estate Program Manual. They're expected to secure the approvals needed to proceed with the right-of-way acquisition on state or federal aid projects. They must ensure that all state and federal procedures and laws are followed, and you must honor the signed SMA. Your right-of-way consultant, so your appraisers, your review appraiser, acquisition and relocation agents, are expected to be the expert regarding the process and procedures required to properly acquire right-of-way on a state or federally funded transportation project. They must be familiar with our manuals, and they should be guiding the LPA through the acquisition project to ensure that the right-of-way is acquired on schedule. They must ensure that all state and federal procedures and laws are followed, and to inform the LPA when and if they're in jeopardy of any non-compliance. And they must provide the LPA with complete and accurate project and parcel files. Our statewide, regional, local program real estate project managers are expected to provide adequate and competent stewardship and oversight of the local program. They'll provide guidance and answer your questions, and they ensure that the proper documentation is provided. So an important takeaway, the LPA is responsible no matter who actually acquires the right-of-way for your project. Anyone working on the right-of-way project should be experienced and familiar with all of the laws, policies, and procedures. In order to ensure that all these laws, regulations, statutes, policies, procedures are followed, and to aid in oversight, we've developed the policies and procedures. They're not intended to lengthen project timelines or burden local programs with red tape and paperwork. They are meant to provide guidance and instruction on how to conduct a successful federal or state-funded project. Guidance, policy, and procedures can be found in our manuals, and the official Real Estate Forms and Documentation Center is the Real Estate Automated Data System, or READS. And our website also has a lot of useful information to help guide you through your project. As Matt previously mentioned, acquisition activities can't commence before certain milestones are reached. However, there are things you can do to prepare, and these things should be considered early in the design process. Review the title work for each parcel to determine the need for partial releases, ownership issues, or title defects, and then identify which of the parcels may have complex acquisition issues, may need appraisals, or have other issues. If you're hiring a consultant, you can contract with them prior to the DSR. They must be on the statewide list of approved LPA consultants. Hiring them early gets everyone on the same page, allows the consultant to understand each parcel. You can begin your sales study, and then you'll be ready to begin your acquisition. Of course, that takes upfront time and labor, but it will save you valuable time and money. The acquisition process includes the preparation of appraisals, appraisal approval, contacting property owners, so the negotiation portion. Federal regulations mandate that the environmental process is complete before acquiring needed right-of-way, and WisDOT policy is to also have the DSR approved. The plat must be approved and a relocation order must be filed before starting acquisition negotiations. The acquisition capability statement must be submitted to the local program real estate project manager. This documents who will be doing what activities in real estate and provide their qualifications. And then a startup meeting must be conducted with all parties involved in the acquisition phase. These typically take place in person. However, due to the pandemic, virtual meetings are preferred. This is a flowchart and timeline of the acquisition process, and it is available upon request. Remember, your right-of-way must be complete prior to PS&E. Your time frame for real estate completion is an important factor in ensuring that your project stays on track. Timelines will vary due to project complexity, number of parcels, owner agreement, and title issues. It's also important to know what your own internal process is for approving nominal waivers, appraisals, and revised offers. So if you require board or council approval, you may need to set special meetings, otherwise you'll be delayed until your next scheduled meeting. Be cognizant of your own internal procedures that can impact the timeline. The following outlines the timing for a single parcel on an average project. 30 to 120 days should be allocated from the relocation order through the last approved appraisal. Acquisition starts with the relocation order being recorded. Appraisals can then be started and approved. The negotiator then proceeds to develop the offer package. Remember, even if you expect the acquisitions to be minor and you're going to use the waiver of appraisal process, allow time for appraisals. The waiver process can actually take longer than obtaining appraisals because if the owner requests an appraisal, you must prepare one and then your timeline starts over. No condemnation action can be taken without an appraisal, and a single appraisal can take a month to be completed and reviewed. The next part of the acquisition process is the owner's appraisal. The time doesn't start until the approved appraisal offer is presented to the parcel owner. The 60 days is a requirement of Wisconsin state statute. It allows the parcel owner the opportunity to get their own appraisal at the agency's expense. During this time, the acquisition agent should be actively negotiating with the owner, and you must consider the owner's appraisal for negotiations. The next section we'll call negotiation through condemnation. Schedule at least 30 to 60 days. It really depends on the parcel complexity, the owner's time to consider the offer, if you'll need a partial release, the number of owners, etc. Once the offer has been accepted, if there is a mortgage, you must obtain a partial release of mortgage from the bank. And this can be extremely time consuming, especially when you're talking about national banks. If you can't obtain that partial release, then you would need to acquire the real estate via condemnation. However, let's assume the offer has been accepted and we got our partial release. Then you have to pay the property owner prior to recording the deed. Upon recording, the owner should receive a copy of the final executed deed and a letter stating that their 6-month appeal rights has started. The final section is the region review for certification. The local program real estate project manager receives the parcel documentation for review. The FDM states that the documents must be submitted 28 days prior to PS&E in order for review and approval. Remember, if your right-of-way isn't at a certification 1 by PS&E, you'll have to apply for an exception, and there's no guarantee that that'll be granted. You could be putting your property or your project in jeopardy. The LPA or the consultant should notify the local program real estate project manager if all of the needed parcels are not to be fully acquired prior to 28 days. We're going to want to know how many parcels still have to be acquired, why the delay is happening, and when the parcels will be acquired. 150 to 270 days should be built into the project schedule for real estate acquisition. And remember, that's not a hard and fast timeline. The more time you can give real estate, the smoother it's going to go. And with real estate, always plan for the unexpected. Each region has a real estate coordinator that'll be your main point of contact for real estate related questions, project concerns, and processes. And then I'm the statewide coordinator, and I oversee the policy and procedures that we work with, and you can give me a call on those. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Abby. I want to take a moment here to recognize that Abby actually has been the individual who's been advancing the slide deck for all of the presenters today, not just for her own presentation. That can be a real challenging job, one which I think was done very, very well today. So thanks, Abby. Debbie. We really appreciate you stepping up and filling that role today. All right, so we are now going to answer a few of the questions that we've received in the local programs inbox, both over the past few weeks and then through this morning. If we don't get to your specific question during this Q&A session, don't worry. We are going to be posting the full symposium question and answer list within a few weeks from today. Also, if you think of a local programs question after today's symposium, you can always feel free to send that question into that DOT inbox that's on the bottom of the screen, or you can call either Tim or me, Tim Alushigan, or me directly. Our information is going to be included in the PDF of the presentations that, again, will be posted shortly after today's event. In addition, there is going to be a replay that's going to be available of today's symposium that you can access, I believe, through the same link that you clicked to get into the live presentation today. And again, that will be available probably a little bit later on this afternoon. So we do have TAP and CMAQ Statewide Program Manager Travis Hooley with us today. He actually has been doing a lot of the behind the scenes tasks for today's symposium, and again, has been doing a great job. I want to take a second to recognize his efforts as well, really for helping to make this presentation today successful. So thank you, Travis. And one of the things he's been doing is monitoring the inbox for your questions, and he'll be reading some of those questions now. So Travis, what questions do we have to start out with?
All righty. Thank you very much, Merrill. And thank you again, everybody, for participating in today's local program symposium. As Merrill stated, I am the TAP and CMAQ program manager, so I found it only fitting to start with a TAP question that we received this morning. So the question was in regard to TAP state funding and the selection process. As Merrill had gone through the funding allocations for each program, you may have noticed that, yes, TAP funding currently is 100% federal funding. In previous program cycles, there has been some state funding available. That funding amount in state funding is established through the state biennial budgeting process and is subject to change in future program cycles based on that biennial budgeting process.
And Travis, I'll actually interject here. Right now, in the current governor's budget proposal, there is $1 million of state funding that has been proposed for the next biennial budget, and I believe that's an annual figure. Again, it does need to make it through the budget negotiation process, but right now that has made a reappearance.
Yes, thank you for adding that, Merrill. That is important to note. Additionally, as a part of the question we received about state funds was also the selection process. So as Merrill had mentioned, TAP is a competitively awarded grant program that we administer. And that involves both a competitive scoring process and selection by a committee. And that committee is made up of both internal WisDOT staff and external state and other entities. So to quickly go through that list, like I said, we have our WisDOT regional program managers, as well as the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, the Wisconsin Department of Tourism. External agencies who have participated in the committee in the past include the Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Bike Fed, and UW Health Tide. In addition, the Federal Highway Administration will sit on the committee as an advisory role to provide comment as we move through the selection process. The next question that we have on our list here is in regards to street lighting and eligibility across programs. Merrill, if you'd like, I will allow you to go ahead and respond to this question.
Yeah, sure. And you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe TAP does allow for the construction, planning, and design of infrastructure related projects and systems that provide safe routes for non-drivers. That has included street lighting when specifically called out as a safety improvement for non-drivers. However, the eligibility of street lighting does vary a lot from local program to local program. Standard street lighting typically is a participating item in the STP program. Decorative lighting is typically not participating across the board. The optics of the department paying for decorative items is not favorable, especially with the amount of need currently on the local system. Lighting is not currently eligible at all under CMAQ or LRIP. So what I would recommend is, questions specific to your projects. I would recommend directing those to the applicable local program statewide project manager.
Thank you, Merrill. The next question that we have on our list is in regard to bridges, specifically removal and repair, sealing and surfacing of bridge decks, and what type of work qualifies. This is a rather extensive topic. Merrill, I will allow you to go ahead and respond to this one as well. Additional information beyond what is shared in this symposium will also be provided in that Q&A document that I post later today.
Yeah, and bridges are eligible for both the local bridge program, the STP program, and in some cases for the local roads improvement program. For local bridge, there's a little bit more statutory guidance that's directly related to sufficiency ratings. They would have to have a sufficiency rating. I think I mentioned this during my presentation, below 80 for a rehabilitation and 50 or below for a bridge replacement. We have an eligible bridge list, which is going to be posted on the WisDOT website later this week. I would recommend the first step that I would recommend would be reaching out to your county highway commissioner or your regional local program manager for information specifically regarding your specific bridge, roadway, or project.
Thank you again, Merrill. Our next question that we have is in regards to program eligibility for parking lanes. Specifically, the question is there a program that municipalities can apply for to help cover cost sharing for parking lanes adjacent to WisDOT highways? So, Merrill, I will let you take that one as well.
Yeah, parking lanes are eligible if they're part of a larger STP project. Standalone parking lanes are not eligible really in any of our local programs. They're not eligible costs at all in LRIP, in TAP, or in CMAQ. One thing I would point out, though, general transportation aids, the GTA aids that are available for every municipality are certainly a great resource for municipalities to meet funding needs that aren't necessarily addressed by any of our specific local programs. So that might be one recommendation for a way to pay for those parking lanes.
Thank you, Merrill. The next question that we have is in regard to chip and sealing for local roads. Specifically, the question was, do any of these programs that we've discussed today pay for chip and sealing on local roads? And Merrill, if you'd like to go ahead and respond to this one as well.
Yeah, I mean, LRIP, I know, funds double chip seals for towns, I believe, only. And it generally, I think that, again, does vary a little bit from program to program. I would recommend reaching out for your specific project for the program that you're looking at, and reaching out to the statewide local program manager.
Thank you, Merrill. Additionally, what I would add, in addition to this Q&A document, we will also be posting a compiled version of all of the contact lists that have been presented as a part of today's presentation. That will also be made available alongside the presentation decks and the replay of this event. The next question that we received was in regard to application deadlines. I know that in Merrill's presentation, he did have a list of application deadlines provided. That slide will also be made available through the PDF presentations and will be the first presentation deck in the list provided on our website.
Yeah, so we're looking at August 2nd, right, Travis, for CMAQ, October 15th for local bridge and for STP, and then January 2022 are the tentative dates for LRIP and for TAP.
That is correct.
Merrill, can I interject? This is Michael Erickson. Just so everyone knows, there are also additional deadlines within the regions for the local program solicitation that's occurring. So be aware that we need some time to review your applications, and in most cases, we're going to come out and meet with the local sponsor on those applications. So please be aware that there are general overall deadlines, but specifically for local bridge, STP rural, and STP urban, that if they're not in MPOs or RPC areas, we will have a shorter deadline for that. I just wanted to interject that. Thank you.
Nope, great point, Michael. And really, general guidance, going back to some of the guidance that I gave for filling out grant applications in general. Earlier is better than later. If you can get your stuff in early, you're going to be better positioned.
Yes. Thank you, Michael, for that addition. It is definitely appreciated. And our next question, I will also be directing towards you and to Mr. Venata. During your presentations, we received a few questions in regard to the SMA confidentiality language, and specifically, can we share the SMA language or the document itself with consultants throughout the process of the project?
Yes. So this came from a public works director and a village engineer in the Southeast region. And generally under open records requests, you're required to provide the SMA. When we're talking about the confidentiality of an SMA, specifically, if you're approved for three-party design, what we don't want to have happen is the SMA get out prior to the negotiating of that contract with design. When you put out your request for proposal or your notice of intent, we don't want the designers knowing what you got approved for the funding for that design project. So under current open records requests, you could provide the SMA without the funding table, and then explain to whoever's requesting that SMA that as soon as and after you've negotiated that contract with the design, that's what we're talking about in terms of the confidentiality. What we don't want with these state municipal agreements after they're approved is when you're going out for your selection of your consultant, there's other documents that you can provide, a concept definition report, which you can get from your WisDOT local program manager or your local program project manager to help with that selection process. But what we don't want them to know is how much you've received for your design project. That's what we're really getting at with that confidentiality. And once again, I refer to looking at your state and local laws, because you could have higher restrictions within your local, your municipality may have different rules, but there are state federal rules for open records. And I think Matt's going to talk about the other questions.
Michael, I just kind of wanted to add with the SMA, I think the same is true for construction funding. It wouldn't be appropriate to share the construction funding before the project's been bid by a contractor as well.
Thank you for adding that, Matt. I'm going to move into our next question now, which is more so a series of questions with regard to culverts. I suppose the best way to approach this will be to go from question to question, and I will let you take it from there. So the first question that we have with regard to culverts was, how does it get determined if an existing road needs more culverts added when you're reconstructing a town road?
Yeah, and I think this would kind of depend on the project and the process, but as you apply for a project, if there's an existing issue that's pretty evident, should be included with the application. Also, during design itself, your designer will be able to work on the design, doing hydraulic modeling and such, that if there is a need for another culvert or a larger culvert, that'll be able to be figured out pretty easily, and it'll be a data-driven decision.
In addition to that, is there any sort of a permitting process for adding those culverts, or can you describe in more detail how that works?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good question. I'm kind of assuming this is an environmental type question. once again, it kind of depends on the program. Assuming, if it's like a state-let project, such as like an STP rural project, the permitting process would be, through the DNR. There's what's called the cooperative agreement through the DNR and the DOT, where the permitting process is kind of an iterative process through design, and eventually the DNR will give their final concurrence. But there's also permitting through the Army Corps as well, which, assuming it's a smaller impact, that would probably fall within the Army Corps' regional general permit.
Okay, that is great information to have. Thank you, Matt. It is much appreciated. Definitely something to keep in mind for those of you who may have culvert needs, and definitely something to keep in mind as you are generating your application materials. Definitely document if you know that there are issues with drainage that may require culverts, to incorporate that into your initial application and your estimates. Our next question, I believe I can go ahead and respond to here, is for small communities who don't have public works or transportation directors, but wish to assess their local roads and streets to help determine priority areas, does DOT offer assistance with strategic planning, such as a staff consultant or funding to hire such a staff person? The state will offer you assistance in terms of making determinations at the local level. However, a great resource that we recommend you reach out to is the Transportation Information Center. They can assist you with determining strategic planning for safety on your local roadways. And additionally, questions about planning and prioritization are strongly encouraged, our locals are strongly encouraged to forward those questions to your local county highway commissioners for further consideration.
Travis, Michael Erickson again. Yes, and Whistler, since the towns are providing information for Whistler, there's tools within Whistler to examine your roadways as well. That falls in line with your PACER ratings. There's budgeting tools and some pretty robust tools in Whistler to help in that assistance. So, in another area, just as an FYI, reach out to your highway commissioners within your counties, and maybe even if there's a UW extension nearby, see if they have some resources available.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Much appreciated. We do have a few other questions that we've received that currently we are still compiling responses to, and those will be incorporated into our Q&A document when we post that to the WisDOT webpage for the local program symposium. So at this time, I would like to pass the mic back over to Meryl Meckler-Hickson to close us out.
Okay, great. Yep, we will have that full Q&A posted. Give us a little bit of time, a week or two, to compile that, but we'll get that up along with all the other documents related to today's symposium. So once again, I do want to thank all of the presenters again for their participation in today's symposium. It's really their participation that has made this a success. And also thanks to everyone who tuned in today for your interest in WisDOT local programs. And please enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.